struggling with traffic on a state-controlled road. We have a full complement of member councillors, and we welcome Councillor Tozer, Councillor Bald-Lumsden, and that's all. We might just deal with all the start items shortly, but we'll go to conflict of interest declarations. So, Councillor Gates, 6.1.
Yeah, I need 6.1, 6.2 and 6.3 unstarred, please, Chairman. 6.1 relates to BC Curry, who donated to my 2008 and 2011 campaigns. On that one, it's $1,000 in 2008 and $4,170 in 2011. I'm seeking permission to participate in the decision due to the length of time since receipt of the donation and my desire to represent the community interest.
Borsa.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm happy to move that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite the Councillor's conflict of interest because of the significant amount of time that has elapsed since the donations and the decision to hand.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, someone like to second that?
Second.
Second by Councillor Owen-Jones. We'll take the vote. We'll call a division. All in favour. Councillor Hamill, Councillor Owen-Jones, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell. Against. And Councillor Gates did not vote. Any others on 6.1?
Sorry, Mr Chairman, that should be that I'd moved the motion and was seconded by Councillor Owen-Jones, just the other way around. That's all right.
All right, any other declarations on 6.1? All right, we'll go to 6.2. Councillor Gates.
I have two declarations, one of which is a prescribed interest, so that means I'm out. So the declarations are that UPS is the town planning consultant, and they provided me in 2014 $1,850, in 2015 $1,850, and $1,850 in 2016, which was refunded in full. But I'm leaving the room due to a prescribed interest with the other consultant on the project, Arcadis, who provided $1,850 in 2015, and one of their employees, Mitchell Bray, donated in 2014 $1,950, and in 2016 $2,500 that was fully refunded, but makes no difference, so I'm going to be out of the room for that.
Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I similarly will be leaving the room voluntarily for 6.2. Want to bring to the room's attention that a reasonable person may form the view that I have an interest in this decision, given that my father-in-law lives in an apartment at the adjacent site and the body corporate.
Sorry, Councillor Vorster, are we talking about
6.2?
6.2, which is the Surfers Paradise Boulevard one or the Albury Street one?
The Boulevard one, 6.2.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So a reasonable person may form the view I have an interest in this matter as my father-in-law lives in an apartment in the adjacent property, the body corporate of which has previously made submissions into development outcomes at other adjacent sites. I'll be leaving the room. No, that's Uncle Alan.
All right. Any other declarations on 6.2? All right, we'll go to 6.3. Councillor Gates.
Declarations are exactly as they were for 6.2, with donations from UPS and Arcadis. The Arcadis one representing a prescribed interest. Do you want me to read the amounts to the meeting again, Chairman?
I mean, from me, they're disclosed on the screen, and as long as that's sufficient, then
Okay, so it's exactly the same. UPS in 14, 15 and 16 and Arcadis in 14, 15 and 16 too. So I'll be out of the room.
okay. Any other declarations on 6.3, which is the Albury Street property? All right, thank you. We'll just deal with the confirmation of the minutes, which is item 3 and remains starred. So would someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Peter Young, seconded by Councillor Pauline Young. Yes.
In regards to that. So when we dealt with the Southport matter and the CBD, so these minutes haven't been, because of the Queen passing, haven't been resolved. The wording that we ended up using was quite, wasn't direct. So it was on page 60. So 3 was the editorial amendments be made to the consultant's report prior to public, reflecting the content of the officer's report, which supports the broad government presence being increased in the Southport CBD. And I read that to actually be the opposite of what we discussed. Does that make sense, Mr. Chair? So we talked about the movement of various levels of government into Southport and how the words in the report had mentioned particular things, and then we were actually trying to be quite, I thought, a bit clearer than what it says there.
So I don't have the original agenda recommendation with me,
Yep.
but I thought we had predominantly removed something from that paragraph.
Correct.
And I can't remember whether this is accurate as a result or not. If it's not, then we should check that between now and full council.
Yeah, so I know, in my view, I knew the editorial amendments we were looking to do, but it wasn't necessarily supports the broad government presence, unless we were talking about 2 other levels of government.
Yeah. Oh. Here's Richard, who I've prepared earlier. Nice of you to be here, considering there's none of your matters on the agenda today.
Through the chair. So the discussion last committee meeting really focused around a broader representation of government there. So it was really just to reflect that, you know, it was all levels of government we should be supporting, be attracted to the CBD.
Rather than council specific.
That was the issue. So the report called out one level of government, didn't actually represent a broad approach. So the intention was, you know, I think there was a bit of wordsmithing on the day to come up with those words. So, yeah.
Councillor Gates?
Chairman, I was just going to say, if you would like, I can get the original agenda from my office and bring it down so that you can see what the original...
Yeah, I think it's probably okay. But we could... I mean, if that's not an accurate representation of the meeting, Councillor Owen Jones, we can put a full stop after report. I mean, it's to some extent academic because we're really going to have the discussion about this being adopted at full council on the 21st, aren't we? So, so should we just do it then?
That's fine.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Richard. All right. Well, on that basis, we had a mover and a seconder. You happy with that still? Councillor Young? All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, excuse me, 6.1. All right, councillors, did you require a presentation? Or Councillor Tozy, you've obviously attended to predominantly participate in this matter.
Yeah, I've come just to say a few words about it because it's been a contentious issue in my community and I wanted to take that opportunity when you're ready for that.
Yep. All right, well, if you're happy, just speak to it when the time comes.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Would someone like to move the officer's recommendation? Moved by Councillor Hamill. I'm happy to second it if we... Councillor Hamill, did you want to open debate on that?
No, but happy to give my time, Councillor Tozer.
Councillor Tozer.
Yeah, so some months ago, I became aware of this application and the council officers had briefed me on it, and I'd expressed quite a number of concerns about a number of particulars in the application. And fundamentally, I think there's a perception in hinterland communities that that some of this continual subdivision of acreage lots into smaller 1 acre lots in certain locations is not appropriate, and even in a lot not far away from here, in fact just to the immediate east, there was lots of environmental conditions applied to a particular application for a 2-lot subdivision maybe 12 to 18 months ago, and some of the issues with this lot, there was a bit of conjecture in the community about certain conditions not being applied on one application and not other applications. So, it's raised the community ire. In this particular instance, the main issue that I had was that the access easement effectively operates like a council road, where what is going to ultimately happen is somewhere in the vicinity of 12 to 16 properties will feed into this, what is effectively an access easement. And the way that it looks on a map is it looks like 6 driveways, but it's technically not 6 driveways. It's one shared road that is not a council road, that is not a body corporate asset. It's effectively an agreement, an access easement agreement that is going to ultimately be informally utilised by 16 properties, not all of whom are party to those agreements. And that creates a problem for my office, because often when something goes down that people aren't happy with, they'll call the divisional councillor. Those issues were raised. The main reason I wanted to be here today and say is that when I raised a lot of those issues, Philip and Brennan and Roger and the team worked really hard to not only answer my queries, but meet me on site. They brought a team of people on site out to talk about some of these issues, and we talked pretty frankly about them. And I'm really happy that the report you're seeing today has incorporated quite a lot of the conditions that we talked about in that meeting. And summarily, one of the things which was a little bit outside the box was that we want to make sure that every new owner of a property or a lot in that area has, if any person purchases or entity purchases a property, there's a note on property services, like an encumbrance that notifies them that the access easement is privately owned and must be privately contributed for the maintenance. So there's no person who could buy a property and say, well, we didn't know. That's not something that commonly happens, but we've been able to condition that through the council officers' diligence and accommodation of what I think are really practical considerations for a future divisional councillor. Right now, the road looks good. It's recently been resurfaced, privately funded, and it looks fantastic. But in 10 years' time, I'm probably not going to be the councillor, and some other divisional councillor is going to get these calls from people saying council hasn't fixed the road or the potholes, and it's actually a privately owned road. So making sure that any future property owner gets those notifications in there. And I suppose I'd flag with other councillors when this sort of thing comes up, asking for this sort of condition, I think actually makes some practical sense. So the public can have confidence when a road is being maintained by council or is actually a private asset that they actually need to budget for and account for. The other thing that was a real concern is that the road, like when you look at it on a map, like I said, it looks like 6 driveways, but it effectively operates like a standard council road entering onto a Wurrungree Road. Wurrungree Road is a busy state road and is not well lit. The reality, it's a rural main road, and this particular corner has some blind corners, and there's a condition in the application here that we've talked about that talks about one property owner being responsible for a light that lights what is effectively operating like an intersection. It's not really a driveway, it's actually really operating like an intersection. And by obligating one property owner to manage that and giving council the head of power to be able to say, well, actually, that's a condition of approval and that's an obligation that you have as that particular property owner, they will be required to manage that for the safety of both the users of Wurrungree Road and also the 16 property owners, ratepayers that use the access road. They're probably the 2 things that I wanted to raise today. These are out-of-the-box solutions that council officers worked hard with my office to try to implement as part of the conditions. They weren't part of the original conditions package. I'm really glad that they've been incorporated. And for the information of other councillors who have rural divisions, these sorts of conditions I think really do need to be considered when we have these sort of subdivisions, acreage subdivisions in rural residential zones.
Thanks, Councillor Tozer. Councillor Owen-Jones.
So can I just ask a question in regards to the identifying it as a private road? What signage does it have, and it might be in the conditions package, but does it have a sign that says private road?
I've got something about it.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is a sign located at the front, fronting Warongari Road, that has private road written on it, existing at the moment.
Page 77 has a photo of the point.
And would there be any merit in maybe not at the front of the private road adjacent to Warongari, but further into the road where it should only be the 16 people that may access it, of actually having an additional sign that A, reinforces that it's a private road, but B, actually confirm there'll be a parent lot that is actually the holder of the land, that is that contact should be made to that owner regarding issues with the road. I know that it's being done in regards to a note on the rates notice, but is there any merit in having an additional sign further up?
That's a question to me. I'm not opposed to that idea. I'm not sure if that's a deliverable condition. I wanted to clarify just 2 things out of the things that were just said. I use the number 16 properties. There's not currently 16 properties, but having foreknowledge of some of the applications that are pending, it appears that there might end up being that. There's not 16 on the map right now, and it's not 16 people accessing the property right now, but my expectation is that based on the pending applications that are expected to come, plus the accesses that are informal and not currently mapped, I expect there to be 16. So just we're on public record here.
So, but even if there's 8 at the moment, I think it's about anybody in the future not being able to say that they didn't read it on the rates notice, but it's that visual. I think it's that visual reference point in the middle of the easement that might be useful, because we can't undo what's happened historically. So we can't make it a body corporate, but it may very well be a limited amount of signage midway up may help clarify that it is a private road that requires maintenance, not by the council.
We might just get Roger to make some comments on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. If you look at page 79 and the second photo, the bottom photo, halfway down the driveways, the low point, and there's a water course that runs through there, and there's a bridge. So if you did want signage, it's probably more practical to have it just before the bridge, because it is like a pinch point.
Yep.
And having vehicular access past that or on it could lead to conflict. But I think if that's the logical place, if you're going to have a sign.
And to be fair, that's not a bad idea, because the bridge itself
floods.
The bridge itself, Mr. Chair, both floods and is still a private asset, not a council asset for the bridge either. So they're responsible. The collective interest is the bridge and the road, and it is not an ideal development outcome. But the advice I've had from officers is that there really isn't a city plan mechanism for us to support refusal. So we need to come up with mitigating conditions that enable property owners to understand their obligations.
Councillor Ghost, did you have something?
I just wanted to ask through you, Chair, if we have a position on naming access roads like this. I know of one at Willowvale, and the residential addresses are Sunnyside Lane. It's called Sunnyside Lane, and then it has a blade on that street name, which indicates it's a private road. So it's clear from the outset that it's got a name, but it's a private road. Do we have a policy on whether we can name these private access roads or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we don't. They're private roads. It's not a public road, but I'm being honest, I suppose emergency services probably do struggle when they're trying to find a particular household. It may be useful, but we don't have a policy, Councillor Gates.
I'm happy to call it Stupid Head Lane.
Roger, just in relation to the bridge, so we've conditioned road widening through a portion of the road down the bottom end, shall we say. We didn't require any widening of the bridge, and so we're expecting a give way type arrangement, which is probably happening at the moment informally. Did we condition signage in this package?
Road
for that?
markings.
Through you, Mr Chair, no. We considered the amount of traffic on the driveway would be relatively small, and it is a pinch point, but no, there is no widening of the bridge.
So any signage that's put up about the road would be new signage. It's not something that would be added to at that point.
Correct.
Okay.
And my understanding is also road markings was part of our conversation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct, yeah. Condition 10.II talks about that.
Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. So I'm looking at page 80 in the first image, which shows that waterway crossing. And my concern is about access for emergency services, fire brigade trucks and things like that. Is the owner required to maintain that bridge to a certain standard of load bearing, please? Because if you get a tanker over there, it's going to weigh a lot and probably more than a small structure would normally be able to handle.
Through you, Mr Chair, it's out of our authority or jurisdiction, Councillor Young, on that. Right. Seems like a very intelligent question to raise, but it's not part of our jurisdiction. Thanks. Because it is private.
All right, well, Councillor Hamill, do you want to adopt into the condition something about a sign nominating it as a private road to be placed at the bridge?
I'd be happy to see that going, Mr Chair. And apologies. I'm just wondering, on the emergency services point, not on the load rating the bridge, but just about the question about Roger's point that emergency services would find it difficult, possibly, of like you can't put it into a mapping system. And it would be on the state-controlled section, I guess, up the top. But should there be some kind of signage or numbering system up the top to help emergency services that just something up the top that they could reference?
So I don't know if it's something we could or should do today, but I would say that Councillor Tozer might want to investigate. There is a road reserve that runs parallel to this, which we could name. Now, the alignment of the road is not sitting neatly on any of the easements or on the public road reserve, but we could theoretically name the road potentially. Mick?
Through you, Mr Chair, maybe another option is if we can't rename or name a private road, we could put a sign up saying that, the properties down here are 213 to whatever, Wurrunggeri Road, so that as emergency services drive past.
But a descriptive sign that shows where the property is.
Just something, so, because an ambulance...
So are we happy for us to do that as a council, or are we expecting... I mean, to me, this is a clear-up of other properties that are not just these four. So
Chair, I was even going to suggest, we've got time before full council if officers wanted to come up with an option to add in at full council, just something that, being from a rural area, I know how important it is for ambulance and fire services to be able to identify properties quickly, and it is difficult to put it into a map and get them to show up sometimes. So I think anything that could be done just to help give an indication of that 213 ABCD is down here, at least in a reflective sign that can be seen at night time kind of thing. But if that's something we could try and do before full council and add in then maybe.
All right, so if we can work on those two things before full council, please.
And as long as, I guess, Councillor Tozer's happy with that.
These are the safety sort of provisions that I raised, and, the advice I've got is that it can't be refused, and it's not necessarily practical to do so. So these sort of things, I think, are really good additions to the conditions package to make sure that the property owner understands the complexity of subdivisions in places like this. And honestly, to set a precedent for other rural areas, like Councillor Hamill's area, or, Councillor Owen Jones, anyone who's got, or Councillor O'Neill, and, anyone who's got a rural residential area needs to be aware of these sorts of conditions should ultimately become considered in every one of these sorts of applications as we see subdivision applications being lodged.
All right, well, on that basis, you happy to continue to move the item? Anyone else want to speak for or against? Otherwise, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, 6.2. Yeah. So Councillor Gates, do you want to be excused? Okay. So we can just note that Councillor Gates departed at 9:35. But you want to come back for 6.3? Yeah. So we'll get you back, Councillor Gates, as being excused. Well, that's the same. It's exactly the same method of departure.
You see somebody left that didn't come back. Wow. It's 2 days in a row. Yeah.
Councillor Hamill.
So, if you just wouldn't mind quickly, I didn't want to close on that one, but I just wanted to make the comment that, and it's something I heard Councillor Tozer say, but it was obvious from reading that report and the discussion that Councillor Tozer just raised up on that last item that there had been a really good collaboration between officers and the councillor to deal with some issues. Like when you read the report and then hearing Councillor Tozer's comments, so I just thought I wanted to put it on the record what Councillor Tozer said, that I think the officers did excellent on that last one, and it's obvious that the input of the local councillor on behalf of his community was well considered and helped get us to that outcome. So closed.
If Councillor Gates was here, she would pick you up on the officers did excellent.
So I understood what he said because we both went to bed.
Yeah, all right. That was in the same book. All right, let's move on to item 6.
You all know what we meant.
2.
Yeah, use.
6.2. Now, did we want a presentation on this, or happy to let it? Okay. Someone like to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor O'Neill. Seconded by Councillor Pauline Young. Did you want to speak to it at all? Well, Councillor Taylor, yes.
Thank you. Look, not only this item, but the next item coming along is a couple of smaller type developments in our area that, in my view, are close to being really good developments for our particular area. Obviously, we're unlimited and no height limits, and we've always got the challenge of some of the bigger developments on the smaller blocks. But this one in particular, and we will talk to the next one, are examples of smaller blocks in our division that developers are looking to put some sort of development on that particular site. And we always understand performance outcome is always a challenge for our officers. And I do want to thank Lara and Caitlin for meeting us on site and walking through it. But performance outcome is based on, I say it's a word. We've got no strict requirements to actually hold on to. And I think the smaller developments, performance outcome, this gives us the ability to actually get smaller, better type developments in some of tighter and challenging sites. And I think these two sites, but we'll talk about this particular site at the time, I felt could have been a very good development for that particular block. We had a small block in between two current developments, so there was no opportunity of redevelopment of that area. It's a tight area anyway, so the challenges for transport in that particular site is going to be always a challenge for any type of development. Even if you had a 2-storey house, I think it's going to be a tight, challenging site. Servicing, it's going to be no different to any other developments we deal through the area. And the challenge we do have with a development like this is your large wheelie bins the large skip bins that will go out the front, compared to having 15, 20 wheelie bins out the front as well, is two cosmetic challenges that we do have been in the city. So I just really felt this development was very close, and we just want to make sure that as much as there's times where we're fighting for big developments on small blocks, these two type developments are developments I believe we could have worked through to actually get an outcome. But I do appreciate the time we had on site. I think it worked for both of us to understand the challenges of the area. But this particular site that you see on the Gold Coast Highway or Service Paradise Boulevard is between two current developments. the impact of that particular site is no different to any other impact of any development in Division 10 currently. So I did see potential in this site as being an opportunity of a development of this particular size. We can always argue whether it's 7, whether it's 9, whether it's 10, but to me it was a sensible development brought to the planners and to the city for an appropriate site in a large scale development area. So I just, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Pauline.
Thanks, Chair. And some of what Councillor Taylor has spoken to is that it's a good-looking design and it presents well, but there was significant issues brought up during the report, and I think the one for myself, and I'm sure some of the other councillors, is with that increased intensity, it compromises pedestrian and vehicular safety within that area. And we are a city that's growing very, very rapidly, and to increase the intensity on a site of this site where it actually starts to compromise the safety of the people that live within the area, the people that are travelling through that area, plus the flow of the traffic and that, I think it's something that we need to be aware of going forward. I think it's a 435 square metre site or something, so with this, and it presents well, and I would say on a bigger block of land or in an area where that we could have better setbacks and that where better pedestrian and vehicular safety presented itself, then it could have been something that could have been supported. But as is now, there's too many issues there.
Right, thank you. Anyone else want to speak for or against? Otherwise, we'll happy with that being closed. Councillor O'Neill. All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, 6.3. Councillor Tyers, are you going to grab... Oh, sorry, you're going to grab Councillor Vorster, or are you doing something else? Okay. Oh, do you want to grab Councillor Vorster for me, please? Right, councillors, excuse me, item 6.3, welcome back, Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We need a presentation on this one, and we're happy with that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Tozer's departing. Moved by Councillor Peter Young, seconded by, you can't second it though, Councillor Taylor. I'm happy to second it. Did you want to speak to this one as well, Councillor Taylor?
Thank you. And as just mentioned, again, a lot along the lines of the previous development, another opportunity of a smaller style block with a reasonable intensity building for that particular area. I do take consideration there are other developments in the area that could assist a block like this to be amalgamated. But I think the challenge that was previously mentioned on the last item of traffic transport in relation to larger developments, our services is always going to be a challenge anywhere in the city. And again, this for me is for some of these smaller blocks a good opportunity for a good small development in the city as we grow, and it gives a different feel for the city instead of large, intense all the time. It does help us give the ability to break up certain areas to give a bit more of a spacious feel. But it was again a development, and I'm hoping moving forward we can work with the applicant to get an outcome down the track, because he's still got the opportunity to develop something there. But again, it's an opportunity. These smaller blocks with a less intense building, and the challenge for any development will always be our servicing and our parking, our parking and traffic management. But we've seen many other applications that's come to council where we've been able to get an outcome in all these areas to have larger developments built. So, thank you.
Right, anyone else want to speak for or against? Councillor Hamill.
Question, Mr Chair. Just noting on page 280 that it discusses the information request that was given to the applicant, where I think it might have been suggested for the second time that they needed to reduce the building to 4 stories to get support on that part. In the information request or in previous meetings, was a discussion about the setback side as well, or was it just that if they came down the 4 stories, we'd be closer to something that could be possibly accepted?
Through the chair, through the information request, both setbacks and height of the building were raised as issues through the assessment. For the setbacks as currently proposed, a height of around 4 stories would have been considered more appropriate in this location.
Yep. So it's not that they can't achieve a development outcome, it's just that they haven't met any of our requirements, and that's why they're here for refusal today.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Yep.
So, councillors, when I first moved to the Gold Coast, I lived directly opposite this particular site. So I know the street well. And I'm just speaking in reference to the earlier matter, I was probably more inclined to support the approval of the intense form of development where there's no ability for redevelopment on the tennis court and the car park next door. But in this particular street, there's a 2 metre setback for a height of 30 metres is going to significantly impact the future development of the sites adjacent, and I think those 3-storey walk-ups on either side are very, very likely to at some point be the subject of a redevelopment, and we have to be mindful of ensuring that there's fair play. So, you know, on that basis, I couldn't support this one, which is why I've seconded it. So, Councillor Hamill.
I was only going to make a point, Mr Chair, that while we have a performance-based planning scheme that doesn't allow for to prohibit outcomes, for me, this is a really good example in these two of where you can't have prescriptive outcomes, where things like height limits and setback requirements and sticking to the line actually delivers what we would want here. That, while both these have gone through a refusal because they've gone for a little bit too much, without being prescriptive, we've set a very clear message of what we would accept in that area and what would be a good outcome in terms of different product to the market to break up what's in there.
Good point. All right, anyone else want to speak for or against? Otherwise, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, councillors, any other items of general business?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Not general business, but through you to the Director, I'd love an opportunity to receive some information from city officers, if they have it to hand, through their industry connections or just professional experience, around the way other local government areas in southeast Queensland manage the issue of mapped height. In other words, in areas like Palm Beach, for example, and others, we apply this 50% test in order to provide a handbrake on ultimate heights. In centre zones, for example, in Varsity Lakes, where we do not have that, if an applicant can satisfy, I think, an 8-legged test, they can lodge an application and reach for the sky, as it were. I just want to wrap my head around why it is, this is just my perception, that here on the Gold Coast, we seem to generate a lot of community angst around the application of that handbrake, but in other local government areas, they do not. And I just wonder whether other local government areas have a way of managing community expectations around height because of the way that their planning scheme is structured in a way that we do not structure our planning scheme here. So if city officers have some understanding of how applications that exceed the mapped height are dealt with to support or reject height above that mapped height, I'd love to understand what the competing models are. Thanks.
Probably, I don't know if Richard was tuning in for that. Did you hear that point? No. Sorry, the mic wasn't working, was it? No. Councillor Vorster was just basically saying we have the 50% uplift test, which is intended to provide a ceiling for our building heights, what are some of the other models that are used in other local governments, and how are they managing community expectation around impact assessment that goes above the mapped height, for example? Now, you don't have to answer that now, but I think if you could have a think about it and have a think about how other local governments are managing that or not managing that, as the case may be, I think some feedback on that would be helpful.
Okay.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, and for me, the officers do a great job. The amount of developments come through our division is, it's a testament to what they actually do and the work they do, but they do have that challenge. The challenge is what setback do you have compared to height and the size of the blocks? And we don't. That is a challenge we have with any of them. So we've all seen applications come to council where we're talking about a higher limit, which is unlimited, which is great, but we're talking about the setbacks. But the challenge we always have, whether it's for officers or whether it's going to the planning court, there's nothing to actually talk about what our setbacks need to be in relation to a related height. And I think it's something that it would help the city and particularly our officers to have a clearer line in that space moving forward at some point.
I think in relation to the 50% rule, the unfortunate thing is that the community understanding or characterisation of it is that it's a relaxation, and it wasn't designed that way and it doesn't function that way, and we need to do a better job of trying to explain it, that in actual fact we're providing the development sector and residents a higher degree of certainty around what the outcome is going to be, rather than any exceedance of the mapped height being an ambit claim subject to performance outcomes. And that's the job we need to do as councillors, is to take that message to the community and explain it.
So, like, Mr. Chairman, it could be that we can overcome this issue of managing community expectations just by changing the labels that apply on the maps. You know, whether it's, you know, what's the height limit, 8 to 12, which considers the 50%. Now, that's probably a very blunt way of doing it because it creates a suggestion that maybe 12 is the baseline. But I think if there was some way of incorporating that second figure or noting the 50% into the maps or the interactive mapping platform, that would be very, very useful. But quite apart from that, I've got questions around whether the 50% uplift model is the correct one. And it could be that it is the very best approach in South East Queensland. But I can't make that judgment call without understanding how Redlands or Moreton or even how Brisbane applied. And I read an article in the Brisbane Times recently about how a development was supported by that council over and above the mapped height. And it was almost like a landmark decision from my reading and recollection, because the Brisbane Council was satisfied that that development ticked very, very stringent tests around being a landmark, spectacular type development to justify the 50% increase. So if there are other local government areas that take the same 50% uplift approach, I would also be interested to see what their tests look like in order to justify the uplift. Again, it could be that we have the best approach in South East Queensland. I'm not saying that we don't, but I'd like to know what the competing models are, because plainly the community feel as though there is no certainty. We believe that there is because we understand the planning rules, but if there is a better way of explaining it or a different model we can take, maybe it's something we should be contemplating after the state government finally gets around to ticking off on Amendment Package 2, 3, 4 and 5.
Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll just take up where Councillor Vorster left off. Going back to when there was a draft city plan, did any of the community groups that made submissions into the draft city plan question the 50% uplift, or was there a sort of a general acceptance? Because what I see now is those particular groups are actually aiding and abetting the residents to believe that we are approving developments outside of the city plan. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if you can remember back to 2015, but...
What the historical part that I think is important to note is that we're at the end of a very old, or relatively old planning scheme. So it was the 2003 scheme that had been amended multiple times. So by 2015, it was 12 years old, and we were seeing case after case after case where the mapped height was being exceeded in an impact assessment, for example, and the heights were 10 stories in a 3-storey zone. Now, we as a council at the time felt there needed to be something done in order to provide certainty to both the community and the development sector. And because you can't, in planning, have an outright prohibition, we had to come up with and develop a particular set of parameters around how we could have flexibility. And so that was the basis of the test. Councillor Taylor.
And I just want to reinforce the education side of it, that really's been a big part of educating the public. Is we have a city plan where we have our requirements, state legislation, which affects the whole of the state, is a performance outcome that we have no power on. And by having the 50% uplift, this is the city's way of controlling it, as Councillor Caldwell just mentioned. And I don't think that a lot of the residents actually understand the performance outcome is out of our hands. It's a state regulation, but we have put some powers in to manage that height limit. So again, I think the ability to actually say what our height limit could be is a way that we could sell it as a city. A challenge I have, obviously, in my division is obviously unlimited, so I don't have the 50 uplift, and then we have the size of blocks of lands and the setbacks that talk to it. Sorry?
X plus 50%. Unlimited plus 50%.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, I can't quite recall, but if the article somewhat suggests that it was not unprecedented, but it wasn't, if the article suggests it was somewhat of an extraordinary decision that relied on the architectural merit, then it very well could be that article. You know, I was speaking with city officers before and reflecting on what I feel was an absurd decision. Sorry, I'll withdraw that comment. I was reflecting on council's decision to support a development in Varsity Lakes, which I won't name, where the applicant successfully argued for this increase in height, right, based on an approval for what had been granted below. And there was effectively, in the course of that debate, no limit to what that applicant could have achieved. We've had a similar case in Robina, where there's effectively a height of 8 stories, but an applicant has used that to lodge a development for 2 14-storey towers. And I'm just really concerned that we don't have the correct language or community understanding to defend those decisions. So it could be education. There could be a better method out there, or we need to do a better job of noting reasons for supporting an application in our decision notices, and to make those decision notices more publicly visible so that there is some transparency around what we relied on in order to support a development application. In the vacuum that we currently have, I think the community is getting more upset than they need to be, and that makes it much more difficult for us to engage with them when there are contentious or very complex planning applications.
I'm happy to finish off, but this does put more emphasis on state government to actually approve or pull their finger out and do something about the 2 and 3. We as a city have gone and done our work with the community. We have actually listened to the state government and given them a city plan that we believe meets the city's requirements. And until they approve it, we can't consider anything else. And I think we as a city have done our job, and it's up to the state government to start doing their job and at least approving what we've done the work in the 2-3 years period of time, so that we can continually keep improving the city plan to meet the state requirements and to meet the community expectations.
All right, councillors, if there's nothing further, we'll close the meeting at 10:01 a.m. Thank you all.